Okay, picking up where we left off on page 205, we're talking about the parts of a URL to expect to see a test question on this. Maybe not one quite that complicated. Maybe one more like this, where there's a protocol, a machine name or a machine name alias, a domain name, some sort of a path, and maybe even a page at the very end. So yeah, be ready to deal with that. Okay. So next we're leaving the world of web and moving on to email. Yay! On page 207 they talk about that in the beginning it was email was the killer app. You know, when the internet first began, email and sending files back and forth, and this thing called Telnet, which is sort of like a remote connection where I could remotely log into someone else's computer using command line stuff. So those are the big three. The FTP and Telnet were kind of minor, but email was king. That was the killer app. That's what people talked about, is being able to send messages back and forth. And so, yeah, they go off on this philosophical tangent about how wonderful email is, and I'm thinking, that's all fine, but this is a networking course. So let's kind of cut to the chase. I did kind of like their advantages and disadvantages, so let's just talk about those. The advantages. First of all, it's asynchronous, meaning that I can fire and forget. I fire off an email, and wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I want to send an email. I send an email, and knowing darn well you're not going to get it until the next morning, or maybe the next afternoon or whatever. So that's okay, and that's unlike a phone call. I would not call you on the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. At least I hope I wouldn't. And but I could send you an email at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I kind of like that. It works across time zones. I send email all the time to people in Europe, back and forth, and it's kind of frustrating because I'll say, I'm working on something in the evening, and I go, hey, try this. And I'll get a note saying, oh, okay, I'll try it in the morning. And I'm thinking, morning? Oh, yeah. Okay. It allows you to cut through a bunch of hierarchy. Now, this could be a double-edged sword, but, I could send an email to the boss and say, look, there's some strange things going down here on the shop floor that you need to be aware of. I don't necessarily have to go through, the chain of command. I mean, you could have policies that say that you shouldn't email the boss, but outside of those policy reasons, there's no technical reason why you can't be firing off emails to lots of different kinds of people. Now, there are some disadvantages. One is it kind of tends to encourage people to just blast things out to everyone. It's like, 40% of the employees are park in the parking lot, the east parking lot. So I'm going to blast out an email to everyone saying we're paving the east parking lot. In other words, it's just a shotgun blast. It's like, I'm not going to take any effort whatsoever to try to figure out who you guys are. I'm just going to send it to everyone. And if it just so happens to apply to you, fine. If not, just ignore it. So I get tons of junk mail. Not necessarily spam, but just junk mail going, wow, that doesn't apply to me. The other one is it kind of sort of encourages kind of a quick response rather than a well thought out response. If you had to formally type up some sort of a response to a question, you might think about it a bit more, and you'd probably hand it to somebody to proofread, and they'd make sure that everything's fine. But if you're sipping coffee with one hand and typing with the other, and you're going boom, hit the button, it's gone. And so that could get you into troubles, as you can imagine. And if you're having sort of like a conversation going back and forth, it's not really, there's no real rules on there's no one person in charge of the conversation, and things can get out of hand, and people can drift off topic. You're asking, you send a draft document, say, hey, comment on this draft, and next thing you know, they're talking about bowling league scores. There's nothing to keep them contained because there's nobody really in charge of the conversation. Okay, they talk about spam, and there's a cute little vignette here in the book talking about Monty Python skit, and so the developers were kind of fond of Monty Python, and so they kind of use that term. But spam is basically that unwanted email, not necessarily junk email, but for people you never heard of, never want to do business with, or send you stuff. The interesting part about spam is it's very profitable. I know this sounds a little crazy, but just bear with me. Let's say that the success rate of people, I get spam saying, I don't know, Viagra, whatever. I get spam email telling me, buy these stocks. Well, if, in the example they gave in the book, if 1/100th of a percent of persons actually bought something because of that spam email, then it's profitable. So we're at fault making that stuff profitable. If spam people sent out email and absolutely no one bought anything at all, they would quit sending it out. The reason why they're sending out spam is because somebody's doing something with it. Somebody's buying their shit. Okay? I'm just telling you. Now, it's an extraordinarily low, what's called marginal cost. How much money does it cost to send out blasts of email? Practically nothing. And so if I get a few $100s of sales out of this, that's more than I had before. Okay. So, low marginal cost and even extraordinarily return on an email still makes it profitable. So shame on us for keeping those guys in business. Email has some really spooky things when it comes to retention rules. There have been an awful lot of there's an electronic I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, some rule that basically came out and said, you need to establish some sort of a rule for how long you're planning on keeping emails, because they basically have to be available for review. If you had a lawsuit or some sort of a criminal investigation going on, you would have to be able to show that you have a retention policy, and you have to show your emails. Now, most companies have an extraordinarily short retention policy for their emails. I'm not exactly certain. 1 month is about right. So if it's older than a month, it's not going to be there. Now, if somebody starts a lawsuit or starts some sort of criminal investigation, then they're obligated to keep longer than that. But under normal circumstances, emails older than a month are not kept not saying that they got purged from your machine. I'm saying they got purged off the server. Okay, so yes, this is kind of tricky. And you're supposed to have a set of rules that you apply, and you can't have a rule say we're going to use 60 days for this type of content and 40 days for this type of content. No, because that means a human is going in there and classifying these things by looking at it and going, oh well, no, that's not how it works. It's one of those all or nothing kind of things. Okay. Carrying on page 211, they talk about the actual architecture of email, how that actually looks. So I want to send an email to somebody. Okay, I guess not. Well, okay, hold that thought. Before we show you how it's done, let's talk about the actual parts. So there's multiple parts into an email, sending an email. One is I need to have what's called a mail user agent. That's the thing installed at your end, the mail user agent. And the examples are things like Outlook and Thunderbird and Outlook Express. Here's an example of how. So Outlook and Outlook Express is used by 59% of the people. Thunderbird, Evolutions, Apple, Lotus. Okay, so most of the people are running Outlook and probably the free thing that came with their machine. The next one is called the Mail Transfer Agent. And this is a little more complicated. This is done at the server. And so most people, if you were to walk up to the street and say, what kind of mail transfer agent do you use? They would say, well, I don't know. I'm using Outlook. Because they don't ever deal with this. This is somebody that somebody else deals with. So my internet service provider provides me this. Which one of these is my internet service provider providing? I don't really know. I do know the university is using Microsoft Exchange. Okay, I know that one. But I don't know. So each client basically has a mailbox, just like you have a mailbox at the end of your driveway. Okay. Let's just talk a little bit about how this thing was started. Originally, you didn't really have this. Everybody had one of these installed on their machine. And that didn't work very well. That was not really scalable. And the reason is, let me go ahead and go to the next picture. So here's how things work now. I have a person here that I want to talk to a person here. So I have a trusted third party, like my internet service provider. Perhaps it's Google for, my Google Mail, whatever. So this is being done, and so I have Outlook or Thunderbird or whatever my MTA is, and I'm sending it all here, my MUA, sorry. I'm sending it to my MTA, and then across the internet, this stuff gets transferred back and forth to somebody else's exchange or whatever, and then it goes to their client installed on their machine. Okay. This works very well because this part of the diagram is always turned on, right? Those mail servers are always on 24/7. The internet is always on 24/7, but these guys are not. All right, so think back in time when everyone had their own mail transfer agent installed on their machine. And I'm over here on user B, and I'm trying to talk to user A, and their machine isn't even physically turned on. Right, so that just don't work. It's certainly not scalable, and so clearly they had to make some changes. So they broke the thing in two. They have the user agent piece, which you turn on and turn off, and then you have the transfer agent, which somebody else handles. So that deliberate split between the two. Okay. To dig a little bit deeper, again, I'm starting on page 211. They talk about the simple mail transfer protocol. Now, SMTP originally was the only protocol you needed because you had this installed on your machine. And so SMTP is the only thing that was needed to pass between one mailbox to another mailbox. If, for example, everyone had a mailbox and the mail went directly from mailbox A to directly to mailbox B, I don't really need the post office, do I? Right? But we do need the post office. So now the mail goes to some central location and then it gets distributed. Okay, so originally SMTP is the only one I needed. Okay, cool. Now we need a pair of protocols in order to get this to work. What most people have in their internet service provider, they use SMTP to send mail out. The outgoing mail from you is using SMTP. But the incoming mail is a completely different protocol. There's lots of choices. One of them is called Post Office Protocol, POP. There's another one called IMAP, which is Internet Message Access Protocol. And so those guys, POP and IMAP, are as far incoming from the post office, so to speak. So before, all we had was SMTP, and everyone just sent directly to their boxes, and I didn't have to go pick up my mail at the post office because I just went out to the street and there it was. But now it's a little more complicated. I can send mail through the post office, I can receive mail through the post office, and so I have to have a pair of technologies. Okay, so email, by its very nature, is asynchronous, right? I don't have to be home. My mail gets delivered whether I'm home or not. My email just stacks up waiting for me to connect. So I'm on vacation, I don't read email. And then I come back and I crack up my email and I go, oh my goodness, look at how many emails I got. Jeez, right? So it's completely asynchronous. They just wait for me until I get home. Doggone it, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.